Pikes Peak, America's most famous mountain. Lieutenant Zebulon Montgomery Pike first saw the peak on the afternoon of November 15, 1806. He was not the first to see it. He attempted to climb it, but did not reach the summit. Incredibly, railroad trains now carry sightseers to the summit of Pikes Peak. The Manitou and Pikes Peak is a cog railway. Our train can climb 25 feet for each 100 feet it moves forward. An ordinary railroad train has difficulty climbing 4 feet in that same distance. The cog system used by our railroad is called an Abtrack, named after Swiss engineer Roman Abt, who invented it. The offset teeth cut into a center rack rail mesh with gears called cog wheels under our train, providing all the propulsion. The outer rails are just used to balance the train. Cog railway switches have many moving parts. Our train climbs through the Pike National Forest. With 1,400,000 acres, this forest is larger than the state of Delaware. Our train arrives at Minnehaha, the location of a passing siding by which we will get by the first of 2 downhill trains we will encounter, as this is a busy railroad. Our conductor throws the switch that will allow the trains to pass. The passing sidings were not built until 1976. Sharp-eyed passengers spot Minnehaha Falls. Today, it is hard to believe that cabins, a laboratory, and even a hotel, the Minnehaha House, once graced these hillsides. At Son of a Gun Hill, our train climbs at 25% grade. It was named by steam locomotive firemen who had to shovel a lot of coal to climb this hill. The spire on the right is Eagle's Roost, while on the left is Castle's Dome. Together, they form Hell Gate, the only natural gateway to the summit of Pikes Peak. At mile 4, we can see the path of our tracks on the big hill, high on Sackett Mountain. Mountain View is the longest straight track on the railroad, 3/4 of a mile. An old railroad coach rests here as a shelter for track workers and hikers from the Bar Trail. The offices of the Pikes Peak Daily News stood at Old Mountain View, a little downhill of the present location. Passengers' names were gathered on the uphill train. By the time the train returned downhill, an edition of the paper with these names was ready to be sold. Steam locomotives once took water at Mountain View, and an operational water tank remains here.
Start to look at the valley below us to the 16th side of the train. You'll see a large group of rocks. You are now looking upon the Lion's Den, and as I just mentioned, that was as high as Lieutenant Pike and his expedition made it.
At Grecian Bend, our train begins its climb up the track that will take us above Timberline, track called the Big Hill. Our train continues uphill. Extraordinary alpine views are everywhere as the breeze acquires the chill of altitude. This is Pikes Peak granite, broken into small pieces by the freezing of water that has seeped into the porous rock. Our conductor points out a small spot out there in the field. A pump house and reservoir supplied water to the tank at Windy Point. An employee carried coal from the track to fire the boiler that pumped the water. Along with room and board, he received $1 a day. The original Windy Point tank no longer exists. This was the highest water tank on the railroad, enabling the thirsty steam locomotives to reach the summit. The marmot, a small animal, is often seen by passengers above timberline, as are Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep. The saddle between Pikes Peak and Sackett Mountain features views of the mountains to the west and Colorado Springs to the east. At 14,110 feet, Pikes Peak is the 32nd highest in Colorado. It stands alone on the edge of the plains. Visible for miles, it became the symbol of the American West. We have arrived at the summit of America's most famous mountain. While some passengers head for the refreshments and shop of the Summit House, others pose for pictures, proving their adventure to relatives back home. Views of aspen-covered, lake-frilled valleys grace the south. The red rocks of the Garden of the Gods decorate the eastern view, and downtown Colorado Springs towers above the plains. The choir of Denver's Highlands Christian Church was first to reach the summit on June 30th, 1891. Since then, the summit has hosted every imaginable activity. In the pleasant fall weather of 1912, the Colorado Midland Railway Band entertained on the summit. However, our time on the summit is over, and we must begin our return. Like all gears, the rack rail must be lubricated. In early years, an employee applied lubricant to each tooth with a brush. The lubricant hardened every few hundred yards, and a fire was built to soften it. It took a month to traverse the railroad. Now, automatic lubricators are on the trains. With all these rocks around, one occasionally falls on the track. Explosives are placed, and the many-ton rock is blasted into pieces that can be removed easily. That boulder was made of Pikes Peak granite, unique to this mountain. It is pinkish, soft, and prone to weathering. In 1963, the first of 4 Swiss-built rail cars was delivered. Each carries 80 passengers and still sees service when smaller trains are needed. These cars are diesel-electric, powered by Cummins diesels. These 80-passenger trains were built by the Swiss Locomotive and Machine Works. Like the newer 216-passenger twin units, they were tested in Switzerland. The shops of the Swiss Locomotive and Machine Works are in Winterthur, Switzerland. Here is the first twin-unit train prior to testing. Only half of the train was tested on the Arth-Regibahn, a cog railroad in Switzerland. Extensive testing included engineering analysis of data gathered from instruments on the train. The Manitou and Pikes Peak train meets 2 Arth-Regibahn trains. Mount Rigi is the only peak served by 2 cog railways. The second track is the Witznau-Regibahn. In 1976, the first twin-unit trains were delivered. These weigh 73 tons and are 124 feet long. Inspired by an 1893 carriage trip to the summit, Catherine Lee Bates wrote the words to the song we know as America the Beautiful. Engelmann Canyon was named for George Engelmann, a 19th century English botanist who explored this area. The last operating steam locomotive waits to welcome our train. As our train arrives at the depot, we have climbed to the top of 14,000-foot Pikes Peak and returned.